Alright, so we are going to make a parallax background and some level design assets for a student who really doesn't have a lot of artistic skill, and so they're much more into the programming side, which is perfectly fine. And so we're going to show them how to kind of create a cyberpunk level using the assets that they need. And so the first and foremost thing that I would say right off the bat is that we want to list kind of what the assets we're going to do. And in this case, we need something parallax, and I probably spelled this horribly wrong, but we need a parallax background. We want I would go with, let's do a background, a middle ground, a foreground, and then we're going to also do like a above level. So that basically means like assets above the level. So these are the backgrounds, and then this is the kind of above the level kind of aspect. They have basically platforms. So those are some things that I'm going to look at, and they also have, trying to think here, they have climbable surfaces. And then they have basically depth areas like spikes, things like that. And I need to kind of do this all in one thing. Now, parallax backgrounds and stuff like this is all about basically making something kind of that will move and overlap. So you might need to do a couple of these and then just line them up so that they move. Now, the other thing I also want to add in here is a sky. Yes, I spelled that wrong. Okay, so first and foremost, let's kind of start with the basic idea. So when we think about parallax backgrounds, things like that, I always want to do research, and since this is going to be 2D and things like that, we're going to do a couple of different things. First, you have to define what kind of elements you're going to do this. Are you going to do it at night? Are you going to do it during the day? That type of thing. And so in order to do that, we need some sort of background, basically sky, that type of thing. And so the big thing with cyberpunk is usually the color spectrum. A lot of blues, purples, sometimes greens, and things like that. So we're going to add those elements in there. And I'm going to do it to kind of daylight here. Pick kind of a mid-tone gray, maybe something like that. And I'm just going to fill that backdrop here right off the bat. So that's my sky backdrop, right? And then from there, I'm going to add in some clouds. Clouds are usually darker, and so the next layer is my clouds. I'm going to simply do a kind of adjustment with brushes, so that way we don't have to make anything special. I'm just going to take off or go to the shape dynamics, and normally I work with pen pressure on. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to add in some angle jitter. I'm going to go into the tip shape here. I'm going to add a little bit more spacing to that, and I'm going to go into the scattering. And in the scattering, I'm going to scatter that, and then I'm going to up my count. Now I'm going to up my count, and then I'm going to play with my size here, like so. Kind of see how I'm doing this. I'm just kind of getting a rough size there. So then what I'm going to do is with my scattering and my count jitter, I'm going to start by building out some basic stuff here. And I'm going to do a softer brush, not quite hard, but not quite soft. I'm going to pick a color where it is a little bit kind of bluer, but I'm also going to go a little bit darker and a little bit grayer. And so with that, I'm going to just build one in the middle here, and I'm going to do a little bit small, and I'm going to kind of build that out like this. So there's my first one. That's one cloud. And then what I can do is transform that and I'm going to take off my unify, and I'm going to transform it like that, and I can basically create that one like so. So there's one cloud that I can start with. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another one here, same color, and I'm going to just do a little bit of a different shape, and then again I'm going to transform that and bring that down a little bit too. And if you want, you can always transform things like here, like I'm going to squeeze that up and kind of bring that over like this, and maybe a little bit over like this, so it gives it a little bit of depth too. We can add in kind of other layers of depth. We can even go in with the eraser, and I'm going to use a soft brush for that, pretty big here, and just kind of straighten that out and kind of rough that out. So you can get some different shapes, you can play around with that, and that works perfectly fine for my cloud spectrum. In fact, I'm going to go here and I'm going to add a little bit of, pick this background color here and like so, and I'm going to go a little bit darker, and I'm going to go a little bit more blue, and I'm going to use a gradient, and the gradient is going to allow me to add a kind of different aspect like this. So I'm just going to go here, and we're going to reverse that. So I'm going to hit reverse so it's transparent on the outside, and I'm just going to hold shift down, and that's going to give me something like that. It's a little bit different, and I can definitely play around with it. I can even add in a little bit more. Say I wanted a moon or something like that in there, I can do that as well. So I can add a couple different brushes, I can play around with this. So that's another way to do things. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this off to the side here. I'm going to move this off over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my buildings. Okay. So I generally label things after I'm done with them, but I make sure everything's on a new layer so I can manipulate that layer. So this is cloud 1. And this is cloud 2. And this is just a blank layer, so I'm going to move that up. And then this is my background. So this is my first set. Now this is going to be my cityscape, and it depends on how I want to do this. I can either use the sky as a backdrop, or I can get darker and darker and darker depending on how close you want to get to things and stuff like that. So you can either go dark to light, background to foreground, or light to dark, background to foreground, right? And so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it kind of that midday kind of feel, and I'm going to essentially start with a simple shape, right? My simple shape is I'm going to draw a box, and with that box I'm going to pick some of this background color, something in the middle of that gradient that I've picked, and I'm going to fill that in. You can do it with the paint bucket, which is the opposite of the gradient tool. I can just fill that in with the paint bucket, and that gives me kind of a base shape to start with. Or what I can do is, and if I don't like that color, if I feel like, okay, maybe we want a different color in here, we can always go to image adjustment, and we can go into hue and saturation, and I can either push it a little bit more purple, I can desaturate it a little bit, I can add a little bit of darkness, all that stuff. And then what I'm going to do with this is my base template, and then I'm going to create a new layer on top of that, and I'm just going to make a little box. I'm going to do something along the lines of like a window, something very simple like that. And then I'm going to pretty much just control backspace. I'm going to just do a little bit lighter, but I'm going to fill that window in there. And then I'm going to grab that window and move it over here. Now I've got snaps on, so essentially what I can do is just kind of layer that up, and then as I do that, it's just going over and over and over and over. So I'm just kind of layering that up like that, and then we're going to grab this whole thing here, and I'm just going to move that down a little bit, and a little bit like that. And so with that, deselect. So with that, I want to make sure things are lined up. So I didn't like that last one. Let's hold shift down while we do that, and that lines things up. All right, now with that building in there, the big thing about that is that this is just going to be a building block. And what I'm going to do is use that building block to make other things. Now, with that, I can do one of two things. I can drop this down. So I can say, I can merge that down, or I can make it part of a group and then kind of work on it with a group. But what my goal is to make this building, or this building block, kind of the background detail type of thing. Okay. And so with this, we can do different style buildings. We can change the colors. We can play around with definitely different themes and stuff like that. So we can definitely go around and kind of work with it. Now those lights here, I feel they're a little bit too bright. So what we're going to do is we're going to just go to image here, and I'm going to go to adjustments, and I'm going to play with image adjustments, and I'm going to play with my hue and saturation again. And then again, like I said, I want them a little bit darker. This is in the backdrop, and I want them a little bit more desaturated, like so. Now with that said, this is my working element, and I'm going to be working on this as one style of building. Okay, and this is kind of an older style, and so there's a number of different things that I can do to kind of make this work. First things first, I'm going to grab both of these, and I'm going to clone that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select transform, and I'm going to move this a little bit smaller. And because I don't have the symmetry on there, I'm going to try and keep it as square as possible, and something like that. Now with that idea, I'm going to hide these two because I can work with this. And with that idea, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge this down. And so now that's one layer here. And I'm going to hit the Alt, so I can either duplicate this, or I'm going to hit the Control and Alt buttons, and that'll give me the clone. And then from there, I can kind of snap these together and move them like so. And so as long as that's in the backdrop, yes, you see a little bit of a repetition on it, but that can give me kind of the base idea of my building. So I'm just going to use two of these for now. Actually, yeah, let's grab this and just merge, and merge. And so that's my building, and I'm going to simply bring that in together and transform that. And that's in the backdrop like this. And then I'm going to, once I kind of like my area here, I'm just going to clone that down, and that becomes kind of the second layer for my building, right? And so there we go. That's one building. Now I can do a couple of different things with this. First and foremost thing is that once I've got my building, I can kind of play around with it. So I'm going to show you some different ways to kind of do this. So I'm going to clone this about 3 times, right? And there we go. So these are 3 identical buildings here. The first building, I'm going to pick the brush, and I'm going to make sure my brush is no longer being scattered, that the tip shape is, the spacing is back down, and the fact that I'm going to take off this transfer, and I'm going to make sure it's hard again, and like so. Then I'm going to color sample by holding an Alt, and I'm going to sample that color, and I'm going to lock that layer. So by sampling that color and locking that layer, I can now go in and start basically coloring in some random objects, and that turns off those windows, excuse me. So that turns off those windows and makes it look more acidified, right? And so I'm just kind of doing the same thing. And there we go. So I'm just kind of, like I said, just kind of adding some lights, subtracting some lights. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it gives you kind of the base idea. The more random you can kind of work on it, the better off it'll look. And so that is one way to do this, okay? Now, the next one here as well, we can do the same thing. I'm gonna lock that layer again, actually, and let's just kind of select some of these out here. I'll probably speed this up. All right, and so once this is done, I can now take this and take this layer here, and I can go to image adjustments and hue and saturation, and we can definitely play around with the darkness. We can play around with the saturation. We can change the texture of the building. And so now I have another building, right? Now I'm not going to do so that'll give me another building, and I can definitely play around with that and kind of work with this. And then again, fast forward, let's do these other ones here. I'm just putting some base stuff in there to kind of clean up. And if you screw up, you can always erase that. All right, and then my last and final one here. All right, so once these are all done, I'm going to just make sure that they're not locked. So now with this, I've got basically three separate or two separate buildings right now, and I can just keep going in here and go into the hue and saturation and just play around with, we can play around with color. We can kind of find something that we like, but I want to keep it in the purple blue range because of the atmospheric perspective. And so, like so. And if you want the lights a little bit lighter, you can always do a little bit of, you can go into the adjustments and you can go into the levels, and you'll notice that you'll have some levels here, and we can kind of push brights and darks and get a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter levels and stuff like that. And then finally, I'm just going to do adjustments here. And like so, just kind of like this. All right, so with that in mind, I've got these buildings. Now, if I want to do something perspective, something where I see an angle of the building, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that original idea and I'm going to clone it like so. And then I'm going to go select, let's do select, and it's transform, Control T. So I'm going to free transform that, and then I can right click and go into perspective, and with that I will close a building like that, and then do the same thing to this one over here. I've got these hotkeys, so I can select, transform, and then right click, and let's do perspective, and I'm just going to move this side down. And so you can get kind of angled buildings and make them look interesting from that standpoint. And then once you get that, it's basically merging these together. So these can be backdrops and put in like so. If you don't want those, then we can kind of basically maneuver these here so that we just make them a little bit more unique. And then again, we're going to merge that down. So here is kind of another building layer. I don't like this. I think it's a little bit too, so I'm just going to move that like so. Oops. And then move that over. And then this one here, we're just going to, let's transform this like so. And I'm going to clone that. And I'm going to make it a little bit wider. Something like that. So like it can overlap. That's fine as long as you've got what you need. And I wouldn't delete these. I'm just showing you essentially how to take something like this and basically kind of play around with the layers of it and make something a little bit more unique. So we can definitely play around with this and kind of create our own buildings. So once that's done, these are my backdrop buildings. I'm just going to put them over here. I'm going to kind of add like so, like this, and like this. So these are my backdrops. Now I can add on top of these because of the way my buildings are. I can make something a little bit more unique. So for example, this is where kind of the idea of designing cyberpunk style buildings. So for example, this one here, I could create a layer underneath it. So I'm just going to add a new layer, and then I'm going to choose this base color, and I'm going to make sure my brush is solid, right? And so I'm just going to start, if I want antennas, and like so, I can add in antennas. I can add in maybe signage. And this is just basically adding in kind of line work and things like that. I can add in small building blocks on there, just make sure that it follows that perspective. And I'm just gonna kind of so add some more antennas on top of that, and like this, like that. We can add in some more colors. This is in the backdrop, so as long as you get relatively close of basic lines and things like that and straight just by holding in shift. And if you hold shift, and you can always make like a little tower, things like that. So that gives you the idea of like things in the backdrop. You can kind of add in some basic shapes. These are things that you would see. And then to kind of change that out, we can always go in and add in like little colors. Maybe green here. And just make sure it doesn't get super bright. And so that becomes one of the towers. Now, if I want to do something a little bit different, I can go in here and say I want to change the shape of this drastically. I'm going to move this down a little bit here, and then I'm going to collapse the old tower on top. I'm going to grab this one here, and I'm going to change out some different of the flavors of the shape here. So let's use the lasso tool and just hold down, and we're going to go to the polygon select. And so I'm just going to kind of add in some shapes. So nothing really perfect. So, and I'm going to go to the brush, and then I'm going to hit Alt backspace, and that's going to add in that shape. And again, we can add in signage here. I'm going to just add some like this. We can add in some side things like this. And then I'm going to go into the brush, and we can add in some like reflection from the sky. So just if you grab the little sky, I'm going to go with the soft brush, and I'm going to block that layer and essentially just go really big and kind of lower my opacity and something like that. So that kind of adds in like a little bit of shape or something along those lines. I can definitely play around with it. Or if I want, I can do small again and then just simply go back and select my base color. And again, go back to squares, and you can just kind of something like that. It's all about the shape language and how you want this to read. And again, go back in and pick some antennas. Oops, that's a little bit thin. Let's like so, like that. And again, I'm just playing around with stuff like this, and even putting it a little bit horizontal and things like that. So it's all about, again, how the shape language reads, and you can add in different things. And so you can do definitely things with that and basically create your level of buildings, right? Now, once you get to a certain point and your buildings need to come closer, they're going to get bigger. Okay, and so having bigger buildings is going to allow you to essentially see what's going on. Now, as we get closer, we can change the lights, we can make them brighter, and do a number of different things. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick this building here, and I'm going to grab this building here like this, maybe this whole block right so, and I'm going to copy that layer, and with that becomes so that's my layer copy right there. And then with that, I can move this off to the side. I'm going to go into the levels here and go in and adjust the levels. And so from there, I'm going to make the backdrop a little bit darker, and then I'm going to bring the base colors forward, and then I can desaturate or whatever I want afterwards. So with that, now I've got a series of light, and so the next layer, so this goes above everything, so I'll have these as my backdrop, and then with that I can again transform this layer. So again, I can transform this so that everything's a little bit bigger, the windows are a little bit bigger, and I get more sense of kind of it's just in the foreground a little bit more, right? And so you can see here, I can scale this over, and I'm going to only do like maybe 2 or 3 or whatever the case may be. And then from there, I'm going to transform this so it's just going to be a little bit bigger and a little bit in the foreground. And again, I can make angled buildings, and I'm going to rinse and repeat. But with this, I have a next level of layers, right? So at this point, I've got my windows, I'm going to change my color up a little bit. So I still want to keep that purplish color, maybe a little bit blue, change up the saturation a little bit, maybe kind of play around. But so now with that layer of buildings is a little bit closer, so I need more details in it. And the details can be something as simple as trim. So for example, here, like in an old style building, they would have trim every so many floors. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do something like this, and I'm going to color pick this, but I'm going to bring it up a little bit as far as level goes, and I'm going to just make it a little bit brighter. And I'm going to start off with maybe every 4 buildings, or every 4, I'm just going to add a little bit of a kind of a line to it. Make sure you change up the windows. So again, make sure that, you know, the windows are variant. Oh, and I've still got, let's go into shape dynamics and turn off this, and make sure everything's off there. And I think my scattering, so shape dynamics, angle jitter. Let's turn the angle jitter off. That's what's doing it. So now I can again play around with this, and again maybe I'll put a little bit of a block layer up like this, or maybe I will, but I want more detail, so I can even add in, like, maybe some of these have a couple of windows coming through, stuff like this. And you can even definitely go in and kind of add a couple of these. So we can grab a couple of these and go into select by color, and I'm going to choose that color, and I'm just going to select that color range, make sure it's okay, and then from there I can again change the hue and saturation. So maybe I want this a little bit brighter, more saturated, so I can change, definitely go around and add different things like that in there too. So that adds a little bit layer of, like, it's closer, it's going to be brighter, that type of thing. And again, add in those extra elements. So again, what does this do? Maybe in this case, I'm going to grab this building here, and then I'm going to do another layer under it again, and let's add in some block shapes here, something small. Maybe let's add in more signage. Something like this. Maybe we have a billboard up here, and then from there you can add in other things. So for example, if I'm doing like some sort of signage, maybe it's light or something like that, I can go in the text editor and I can do vertical type, and I can do something like that. And make sure your color is a little bit brighter. That, say okay, and we don't need that nearly as big, so let's do something like this. And I'm just going to backspace a couple of these. So there we go. So you can add in some different letters. They don't even have to be English. You can grab letters from the character mapper or something like that. looks like I've cloned this a couple of times. So I can grab something like that and I can turn it into different samples as well. So like we can go through here and let's do that. And so by doing that, it looks like we can always change language to, or we can copy paste from Google and things like that. So, but we can go in and change our letters up. And you can add your sci-fi letters and stuff like that. And we can also go into these shapes here and again pick stuff like this. And all I'm doing is holding shift down as I draw, and it'll draw all that rebar. I'm just going back and forth. So stuff like that. And we can lighten some of these signs and change the colors on them simply by grabbing an area and going into hue and saturation and maybe brightening that up a little bit. And so you can definitely get some different ideas. Stuff like that. Adding in different layers, different effects, and basically building out that concept of design. And so once I get done with that, then essentially what we're doing is we're building it again, right? You know, keep building, keep pushing, you want variety of colors, you want a variety of things, and from there, then you want to build out your other elements. Now, as you go closer, again, more details, you know, maybe you want to put people or lamps or things like that that we can see in certain buildings, and that's going to give you the idea that it's even closer and bigger. And then on top of that, we want our platforms. So we have to have 3 platforms. Now, these platforms can be very simple or they can be very direct. I'm going to move forward on this, and I'm just going to kind of build out, like, say, a box, right? And so this is my walking platform, and with that I'm going to zoom up in here, and with that platform I'm going to just pick a basic idea. So in this case I would do maybe something like this, and then so here's my basic box, and then I'm going to corner to corner and hold shift, and that's going to build out that. And then I can maybe go and add some other layers. So maybe I have a layer of brick on top, or adding in more details. So maybe I would have rivets. So I'm going to add in, you know, maybe rivets on here, and I can keep this very simple. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you can definitely add in a number of different layers, a number of different things to kind of give you the idea that this is some sort of mechanical arch or mechanical platform. We can even go underneath that and go with a darker color and add in like so. And I'm holding shift for this. And so this gives us an idea that there's shadows and things like that in there. And even still, I can go in and maybe with a little bit darker color here, I'm going to do something along the lines of another layer, and we can maybe put like a little pipe in here. So I'm just gonna do something like this, maybe up here, and like that. There's my little pipe, and then I can add in like elements like this. Maybe I want to add in some wires. It doesn't have to, you know, be perfect, but it gives you the idea that there's other things in there and things like that. And I can do variants of this as well. So once I get this all done, I can clone that over and basically make another platform. And then from there, I can maybe add in, you know, a couple of them that have like a little like red dot in there. You know, something like that, or some green in there. Or maybe go in and just add like a little shape in there, like something like that, or, you know, something like an antenna or something like that. And so all of that makes a big difference as far as that goes. So that can be my platform that will show me the climbable areas, right? So these are climbable, I can jump on them. Once you get one done, you can simply go into layer, and we're just gonna merge, select all three, and we can merge layers here. And so that's one, and then that's two. Now I'm not going to collapse, so I've got one layer here, and I can, you know, make variants of that, and I can put them together in the spaces that I need. The next thing is I need some area that basically is climbable, and so in order to create climbable, I need to identify like what I'm doing. And so again, this area here, this is a good start, and then from there, maybe I, you know, grab this and I'm going to clone this off again, but let's transform it vertically 90 degrees, hold shift down. And so with that, then I can say like maybe a different surface, right? And so the different surface is going up on top of this, and maybe you want to make this as like some rubber grip or green area in there like that. And then again, thinking about it from a standpoint of, you know, construction, maybe we're going to add in, oops, let's do that. Maybe we're going to add in some more details, like we can add in like more framing or something like that. And you want to look at scaffolding and things like that, maybe something like this. I'm just holding shift down to go straight across. And then underneath it, we're going to pick that darker color and add that in there to give us the idea that there's depth. And then even here, we can, again, let's transform maybe this here, like this. And so that gives us the idea that we can jump on top of that. And then once you're done with that, again, we can add in 3 layers here, and we can merge that down together. Oops, I did not grab the right 3 layers. Let's make sure that. Let's merge that down. And so now I have a platform that I can easily stack on top of each other and make kind of that environment look a little bit more dynamic. And then to make it appear that something's bad or something's dangerous, in the original case that you have spikes, let's add something to basically make it a little bit more dangerous. And so I'm going to create a new layer here above this one, and I would just create some basic shapes. So for example, right now I think you have just triangles, but instead of triangles, let's do like a transistor. So I'm just going to go here, And I'm going to make something like that. And I'm going to pick this base color here. And I'm thinking of something like this. And I'm just kind of grabbing in and then I'm going to add kind of a, let's add danger red, and then once I've got that, I can do 3 or 4 of those, however big you want. And I'm just kind of putting that in there like that. And so once you get one of those done, that basically says this is bad. You know, I can again kind of grab all this and merge it together as an object, and then that way you can kind of build on top of it. All right, and so that is kind of the gist. I'm going to continue this video, and I'm going to basically make it so that you can kind of see what a final level would look like. But you have all the moving parts, you just need to kind of refine them and make them more interesting. All right? All right, so we've gone through this, and the only new things that I've really done is I went through and added some highlights to the different layers and stuff like that. And you can collapse the layers and make them individual kind of sheets. That's perfectly fine. What I did though do is I made my little pillars in the foreground. They weren't giving me enough contrast, so what I did was I basically brightened them up. Nothing we haven't done before. And the other thing I did was I added a layer of multiply so that it pushes the foreground and the background out a little bit more. Now I can always add another layer and kind of play around with that different aspects. And so when I basically pull that out and make my layers, I can then overlay that over different things and kind of make that kind of ideal. So it's basically one idea of like kind of making a unique layer. And if I wanted to even further play around with it, I can always add a layer adjustment where I can add in a little bit of brightness, and that layer adjustment is a level of clipping mask. So now it will just affect my pieces. And so I can definitely play around with the different idea of saturation or darkness or things like that, and play around with making them pop out a little bit more so that it makes the game a little bit more easily played. Or if you want them to kind of struggle a little bit more, then of course you probably want to darken them a little bit more. But that gives you a good base for creating your process of creating individual assets. And you can see that the idea of layering and kind of creating a kind of cityscape gives you some ideas. The other things I can do is I can also add in other things like helicopters or spaceships that are flying at a faster level, and that gives me more interest while watching the video. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks for watching.